This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening from Orlando, Florida. This is our Western edition. Orlando became today the scene of the worst mass shooting in American history. It happened at a gay nightclub about half a block behind me, a club called Pulse. 50 people were killed. We are told that tonight many of the bodies have been moved to the coroner's office. The mayor says that the work of removing the 50 bodies should be completed this evening. The only sound at the crime scene now is the ringing of cell phones. Desperate relatives calling to find out if their loved ones are still alive. As we said, at least 50 people were killed, but more than 50 others were wounded, many of them in critical condition, in what President Obama has called an act of terrorism and hate. Just after 2 o'clock this morning, it was last call for drinks at the Pulse nightclub, popular among the gay community, when sounds of gunfire rang out above the music. A lone gunman, 29-year-old Omar Mateen, made his way into the crowded club and opened fire.
Oh my God, dude.
A massive barrage of gunfire was exchanged with law enforcement and pierced the pre-dawn quiet near downtown Orlando. Today, President Obama said the entire country stands with the people of Florida.
Today, as Americans, we grieve the brutal murder, a horrific massacre of dozens of innocent people. We pray for their families who are grasping for answers with broken hearts.
Armed with an AR-15 semi-automatic assault rifle and a handgun, Mateen was also wearing what police say could have been an explosive device. An Orlando police officer working security at the club engaged the suspect with gunfire, and it quickly turned into a tense hostage situation. This mother came looking for her son.
But I don't know where my son is. No one can tell me where my son is. If he's been shot, if he's dead, no one knows. But they told me there are fatalities.
Minutes later, the club posted this message on Facebook with a dire warning. Everyone get out of Pulse and keep running. Witnesses say people ran out between bursts of gunfire or dove for cover. This text message was written by a man hidden in a bathroom who believed he only had moments left to live. Mateen called 911 to pledge his allegiance to ISIS.
There were 911 calls in which there was conversation between the subject and law enforcement representatives of 911 dispatchers. That has become federal evidence.
Orlando police used stun grenades and an armored vehicle to enter the building. 3 hours after the mayhem began, a SWAT team stormed the club and opened fire. Mateen engaged in a sustained gunfight. By 5:53 a.m., Orlando police said the shooter was dead, along with 50 others. 53 were taken to local hospitals, many of them in critical condition. The injured were carried out and transported by any means available. One officer was slightly wounded after he was hit in the helmet with a bullet. His Kevlar helmet saved his life. FBI and law enforcement remain at the scene, scouring for evidence. The gunman was born in New York and lived about 100 miles southeast of here in Fort Pierce, Florida. He worked as a security guard, and he had drawn the interest of the FBI more than once before. Our national security correspondent Jeff Pegues has more on the suspect.
Law enforcement sources say the gunman, Omar Mateen, called 911 during the mass shooting. In the call to a dispatcher, he stated his name and pledged his allegiance to ISIS. While he was not under investigation at the time, officials say Mateen had been on law enforcement's radar at least twice in recent years. Mateen was a U.S. citizen born in New York to Afghan parents. He was living in Fort Pierce, Florida, and has been married. In 2012, Mateen attended the Hajj, which is an annual pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. A year later, in 2013, the 29-year-old turned up on the FBI's radar for the first time. Co-workers said he had made inflammatory remarks about terrorist ties. The FBI's Ron Hopper is leading the investigation.
The FBI thoroughly investigated the matter, including interviews of witnesses, physical surveillance, and records checks. Ultimately, we were unable to verify the substance of his comments, and the investigation was closed.
In 2014, he came to the FBI's attention again, this time because of ties to the first known American suicide bomber in Syria. Monir Abu Salah blew himself up in 2014. After that investigation, Mateen was cleared again.
We determined that contact was minimal and did not constitute a substantive relationship or a threat at that time.
Mateen had been working as a security guard, and with no record, within the last week he was able to purchase a handgun and the AR-15 assault rifle police believe he used to kill and injure more than 100 people. The attack appears well planned. Mateen chose a soft target with few exits for his potential victims to escape. He exchanged gunfire with at least 14 police officers before he was shot to death. Scott, in that 911 call, Mateen made a reference to the Tsarnaev brothers who carried out the Boston bombing. The FBI has now taken those 911 tapes and has begun to dig deeply into Mateen's life and his friendships. Sources tell us that he was not on any terror watch list, and so far there is no evidence that his actions were directed by ISIS, but the 911 calls suggest that he was at least inspired to act by the group. Earlier, I spoke with former CIA Deputy Director Mike Morrell. How important is this 911 call?
It says to me that this is absolutely an individual who was inspired by ISIS.
Why?
Says to me, because he said it, right? He said, I pledged allegiance to ISIS, right? That is the act of becoming a member of ISIS. Says to me he was radicalized. Says to me he was radicalized by them. Says to me this was an act of terror. Says to me this was the largest act of terror in the United States since 9/11.
Is it important for law enforcement to determine whether this was inspired or directed?
Absolutely.
And why?
Significant difference between the two. Strategically and tactically. So strategically, the demonstrated ability of ISIS to reach inside the United States and direct somebody to conduct an attack is huge for their stature, huge for their followers, right? Very important messaging for them. Tactically, their ability to reach inside the United States and direct one person to conduct an attack means they can do 2 or 3. We've been talking, you and I, the last year about something like this happening and the almost certainty that it was going to happen. It's going to happen again, right? Orlando's not the last one. So more of it's going to happen. And there will be a debate, right? There'll be a political debate about how much of our privacy and civil liberties do we give up to enhance our security.
Investigators also arrested a man in California who was armed with an assault rifle. They believe he was on his way to the Gay Pride Parade in Los Angeles. Scott, at this time, there is no apparent link between that suspect and the attack in Orlando.
Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues in the Washington newsroom tonight. Jeff, thank you very much. We are just beginning to learn the names of a few of the victims. We just have a few names out of the 50 who are known to have died. They include Eric Ivan Ortiz Rivera, Peter Gonzalez Cruz, Edward Sotomayor Jr., Stanley Aldomovar III, Luis Omar Ocasio Capo, and Juan Ramon Guerrero. A short time ago, I had a chance to speak with one of the eyewitnesses, Sean Royster. Let's hear what he had to say. Sean, you were at the club this morning. What did you see?
Happy faces. Everyone was having a good time, actually. And then next thing you know, it was like mayhem. I was in the back part. Sorry, it's kind of nerve-wracking even being this close again. I was in the back patio part outside, walking back inside with my best friend and another friend, and they were walking in front of me. Someone had stopped me to say hello. I haven't seen them in a while, so I stopped. They kept walking. Next thing you know, I just started hearing like bang, pop, 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 and people were like scattering, running around. I didn't really know where to go. I'm looking for my friend. I kind of curled up in a corner for a second. Then I unfroze myself and then jumped over the back wall that everyone was trying to get out of. I just jumped over and just kept running. As much as I kept on hearing the gunshots, I just kept running because I didn't know which way they were coming from. They sounded close, they sounded far, they sounded close, they sounded far, and it would stop for about 2 seconds, and then, yeah, like, I ended up going underneath someone's truck just until it got done, until something calmed down, some kind of calm, because it was just mayhem everywhere else.
You got under somebody's truck?
Yeah, across the street. Yeah, I went across the street over to the Wendy's. Behind the Wendy's, there's like houses, and I went behind there and just, I tried to knock on someone's door, get like 911 called. I wasn't sure if they had been called, but no one was answering, so I just got into a truck because it seemed like the shots just kept on getting closer and closer.
How long did you hear gunfire, would you say?
Honestly, my mind was so gone at that point. Probably a good minute, a good 2 minutes, like inside and out, running away, like, I mean, yeah, a good 2-3 minutes. It just seemed like it wasn't ever gonna stop. Like it stopped for about a few seconds, but I'm guessing I was like reloading or whatever, I'm not really sure.
So it would stop for a couple of seconds and then start all over again.
Yeah.
What were you seeing and hearing in that moment?
Screaming, yelling, they were like dragging bodies, people that were wounded, just to get them out of the way. Sorry. Yeah, probably the worst feeling I've ever felt in my entire life, so.
We've seen pictures of people just picking up those who were wounded and running them down the street to the hospital, which is a couple of blocks away. Did you see that?
I saw some people doing that. They had some fire departments, ambulances, and people were doing it that were, because people, when they came out, they scattered. Like, I went straight across. Some people went to the left. Some people went to the right. I guess the ones that went to the right brought them back from that way and came back this way. My best friend, when we got separated, he was inside. He was one of the people who got shot. And apparently he got saved out, and someone eventually ended up dragging him out and getting him to the ambulance, and that's when I finally got in touch with him. He's at the hospital now. Another friend of mine was inside as well, still looking for him. No one's really heard from him since last night. His family's been calling, friends have been calling. We haven't gotten in touch with them, and I mean, everyone's really, really worried right now. So.
Your friend who was taken to the hospital, how is he?
I'm coming back to the hospital now. He was in surgery the last time that I checked. And as far as I know, it's going pretty well, but he was hit pretty bad. I know 2 times in the back, once in the leg, once in the hand. And then with all the mass commotion of everybody running around, he got trampled over, so he also broke his left leg. And that's just one person. Like, there was people outside. And I couldn't even imagine to see what the mayhem was on the inside, to be honest. I just know that it was bad, the way that people were coming out. The ones that were close to me that were coming out. Like, I'm happy that I got away and like harmed and stuff, but at the same time I feel bad. Because there's so many people. It was really packed. There's so many people.
As the police arrived, you were still under the truck. What did you see?
I had got from under the truck by then because they were coming out and they were just trying to escort us all into a safe area behind the Wendy's and in between the 7-Eleven. They just had us surrounded and had us leaning up against walls just to stay away from any like stray gunfire. They were still looking for the person. They didn't know where the person had gone. They weren't sure if he was still inside or whatnot. We really didn't know what to think. We had no idea if it was more than one person, if there was people running around. Because the way that the gunshots sounded, they sounded like they were coming from everywhere. Like one time it would sound like from over here, one time it would sound from over here, closer or farther away. I was literally on my phone. I was just crying and trying to call my friends, and nobody seemed to be getting through to anybody. So I mean, it was the most nerve-wracking feeling, you know.
Did the gunman say anything that you could hear?
I wasn't inside. I was outside on the patio, so I never saw the gunman. I never heard the gunman. All I just heard was gunshots. It went from heavy fun time music playing to 3-4 gunshots, music stopping, and then all you heard was just gunshots and screaming and tables knocking over and people jumping over the fence and people screaming inside, trying to get outside, more gunshots. Like, sorry, I'm really like still
Didn't
kind
seem
of
like it was ever going to end.
No, it didn't seem real, actually. I mean, you've seen this stuff on TV and the news and movies. I can't say it would never happen to anybody, but I mean, it has, but it's just, it's really sad. It's hurtful. Like, I don't know. There just shouldn't be that type of hate in the world.
Sean, thank you so much. Appreciate you. That was difficult, but people need to know what happened, and I'm so grateful. We can't tell this story unless you tell it for us. So
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Eyewitness and survivor Sean Royster. It has been estimated today that as many as 200 people managed to escape the club uninjured. Coming up next on this special edition of the CBS Evening News from Orlando, Florida, why lone wolf attacks seem to be so difficult to stop. The terror attack here in Orlando, Florida is proof once again that a man with a gun and a heart filled with hate is almost impossible to stop. Chris Van Cleve has more on this.
As Omar Mateen mowed down patrons of the Pulse nightclub, Orlando joined a growing list of American cities shattered by violence of a lone wolf-style attack, inspired by hate, be it against a group of people or inspired by a group like ISIS. Orlando Police Chief John Mina.
Our officers put themselves in harm's way and risk their lives for the people and patrons at Pulse.
Lone wolf attacks have happened again and again. Last year, a husband and wife killed 14 at an office party in San Bernardino, California, and 5 service members were targeted by a single shooter in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Major Nidal Hassan killed 13 service members at Fort Hood in 2009. All of the attackers claimed to be inspired by Islamic terror groups. A 2015 study by the Southern Poverty Law Center looked at 63 attacks over a 6-year period and found 90% of the cases where the number of perpetrators is known were the work of 1 or 2 people. The overwhelming majority were men, and nearly 60% involved firearms.
This could happen anywhere in our world, certainly anywhere in America. There are weapons available. This is exactly the thing that ISIS calls us to. It is a siren song. They want this sort of victory that they can claim for themselves. And the more carnage, the better.
Ron Hosko is a former assistant director of the FBI. He says since 9/11, there's been a huge focus on disrupting major coordinated terror plots. But the lone wolf is a lot harder to spot.
One person who is sitting in front of their computer out in middle America thinking and looking, and we're waiting for their fuse to be lit. How do you get to that person? How do you predict that person? How do you defeat that person?
Complicating the effort to find these people, Scott, Hosko says every time there's one of these tragedies, it becomes a blueprint to a would-be attacker.
Chris Van Cleve reporting. Thank you, Chris. And in a moment, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida will stop by here to tell us more about what they've learned. Back now from Orlando, Florida. A short while ago, we had an opportunity to talk to Florida Senator Marco Rubio after he had visited the crime scene. Senator, you've been over to the crime scene. I wonder what you saw there.
It's just horrifying. Obviously, didn't go in because it's investigated, but from the outside, you can still see, obviously, there's people there and relatives still calling their loved ones, and the phone's going off. So it's just a terrible scene.
When you go over there, you hear telephones ringing inside,
and the law
people
enforcement
trying to call their
Sure,
loved
the law enforcement tell you, too, that there's still families calling their loved ones because they haven't heard from them, haven't been able to confirm, and they're hoping someone will answer. But it's just from at the human scale. You think about the people that survived this, and the ones that are still in the hospital, and the ones that didn't, that are going to need a lot of counseling and help because of what they saw. And this sounds like a combat scene.
What have you been told about the suspect? What do we know?
The federal authorities have been quite forthcoming about him so far, and what they've said is pretty much what I know, and that is that this is an individual born in New York, raised in the United States, U.S. citizen.
The FBI was alerted to him in 2013 and 2014. He made some statements to people that seem sympathetic to radical Islam. The question will be asked, Why didn't the FBI do anything then? But give me the perspective on that.
Well, we'll look into it, and the Intelligence Committee will conduct oversight into the process that went into all of this. But just making statements alone is not enough to arrest somebody. This has all the markings of what they call a lone wolf, a homegrown violent extremist who took individual action after being inspired to do so. And that's a growing threat in this country we've known about for quite a while.
Senator, thank you so much. I'm grateful to you. Back from Orlando in just a moment. Back now from Orlando, Florida. Families here are going through an agonizing wait. Only a very few of the 50 people known to have been killed have been identified so far. More than 50 others are in the hospital, and many of them are in critical condition after surgery. Omar Mateen, the gunman who opened fire in Pulse, a gay nightclub, was American, born to Afghan parents. He was killed in the shootout with police. He called 911 during the attack and pledged his loyalty to ISIS, though it is not at all clear at this point whether he had any direct contact with the group. For some of you, we will be leaving, but for other CBS stations, we will continue with this special edition of the CBS Evening News from Orlando. Massacre in Orlando.
Oh my God, people are getting shot.
This was an act of terror and an act of hate.
A gunman opens fire in a gay nightclub.
They were like dragging bodies, people that were wounded, just to get them out of the way.
At least 50 are killed in the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. Many more are wounded.
But I don't know where my son is. No one can tell me where my son is. If he's been shot, if he's dead, no one knows.
ISIS claims responsibility.
The individual has been identified as Omar Mir Sadiq Mateen.
We need to support each other. We need to love each other, and we will not be defined by a hateful shooter. We'll be defined how we support and love each other.
This is the CBS Weekend News.
This is a special edition of the Weekend News. If you are just joining us, we have the latest now on this mass shooting in Orlando, Florida, a massacre in a gay nightclub that occurred in the early hours this morning and is now the worst mass shooting in American history. At least 50 people were killed. Most of their bodies are still inside the club. The shooting began after 2 o'clock this morning. The gunman, Omar Mateen, was an American. He was a security guard who had pledged his loyalty to ISIS during a 911 call during his attack on the club. He was killed in a shootout with police. There were about 300 people in the club sipping their last drinks before the club closed. With more on that, we have Mark Strassman.
15 minutes after last call, bartender Tiffany Johnson heard something ominous. Was that a gunshot?
We thought it was like the stereo. We were like, oh my goodness, something went on with the, just the music. And after the second shot, there was a pause, and then it just started shooting. Let's go, right here.
Then bedlam. Partiers hit the deck. Others hid under tables or ran into bathrooms. Roughly 300 people were trapped inside. 1 in 6 would die. Haniel Gonzalez has 3 friends missing.
People are screaming, help me, I'm trapped, and people are getting trampled. Like there was no clear exit sign at the club, so we didn't know which door to take or where to go.
So you heard a couple shots, and did you hit the deck right away, or?
It was like a kind of like a little duck,
Josh McGill ran out the back exit, hopped a fence, and saved a life. He found a man lying on the ground, moaning. Did he look wounded?
Like he looked like he got shot, but didn't realize he got shot.
27-year-old Rodney Sumter was wounded. in both arms and the upper back.
And the officer was like, there's no ambulance responding at the moment, but we're going to send you in a police car. So the police officer turned to me and said, I want you to bear hug him, keep him conscious. And I was like, okay. So I was like, I don't know if you're religious, but I feel like I need to say a prayer. I was like, you're going to be fine. I was like, I got you, man.
McGill told me he has yet to process how lucky he is to be alive. He has also yet to reach Sumter in the hospital. But Scott, he was told there that the man he helped rescue is expected to live.
Mark Strassman, thank you so much, Mark. Our Homeland Security correspondent, Jeff Pegues, has been talking to his sources all day long, and he's joining us now. Jeff, what do you know?
Scott, we're learning a lot more about that 911 call that was mentioned, the one that Omar Mateen made during that mass shooting. It was the one where he pledged allegiance to ISIS. According to a U.S. intelligence source, the call came from a bathroom at the nightclub, and at some point, 911 had to actually call him back. We don't know why, whether the call was dropped, but 911 dispatchers actually called him back, and at that point we're told he made this pledge to ISIS and also made a reference to the Tsarnaev brothers and the Boston bombing. And so that, Scott, is some of the new information that we've just learned.
Jeff, we understand that Mateen had been contacted by the FBI more than once. What do you know about that?
Well, there were at least two contacts, one in 2013 and one in 2014. In 2013, there were statements that he made to coworkers, according to law enforcement sources, that stated some sort of connection to the Tsarnaev brothers who carried out the Boston bombing. And then in 2014, there was another alleged contact that the FBI investigated, suggesting a link to an American suicide bomber, Monir Abu Salah. He blew himself up in Syria. And so there were indications that Mateen had some sort of contact with him. Both men were from the Fort Pierce area of Florida, but ultimately the FBI decided that there wasn't enough there to pursue a full-fledged investigation. What investigators are looking at now is whether there are any direct contacts to operatives overseas in connection with the nightclub attack. Scott?
Jeff Pegues in the Washington newsroom. Jeff, thank you very much. All day long around major hospitals here in Orlando, there has been a vigil of families who have not been able to contact their loved ones and are waiting outside the hospitals with the hope that they will learn at some point that their missing loved one is in the hospital and has survived. Our correspondent Jamie Yukas has more on this.
24-year-old Jose Martinez went to Pulse nightclub to kick off Pride Week. His cell phone died and his family didn't know what happened to him. Javier Rosales is his cousin.
He goes out to clubs, he works in a restaurant, he's very peaceful, he works 6 days a week.
15 hours later, they learned Martinez is in critical condition. Martin Torres and Michael Morales are a couple. Michael is in the hospital. No one has heard from Martin.
We're just hoping that he's okay, so we're just trying to comfort and give the updates to our family members.
50 people have died. 53 others went to the hospital. Families are waiting. Many not sure if their loved ones are being treated or if they died. Jose Ornedo is searching for his brother.
He was in the club with three of his friends, and they made it out okay, but they lost him, and they don't know where he's at. My brothers are over there waiting for information, and I just came back here to see if they know something.
The hospital is just one block from the hotel where family and friends are gathering. Witnesses and volunteers are coming together for the victims, stunned by the loss of life. Christopher Callan is a worker at the club.
And in our community today, it's not a good thing. I mean, we're not trying to hurt anybody, we're just trying to have fun, and then we get this.
A few moments ago, I was standing talking to two young men who were in the club last night. They were here at the hospital to visit their friend who just had his second leg surgery because of a bullet wound. While I was talking to them, they learned
that their friend's mother had died. Not only was it heartbreaking to watch that, but now there's fear that there could be more stories like that. We know 53 other people went to area hospitals, the worst here to the Orlando Regional Medical Center. A surgeon here says there will be more victims. The death toll will climb. Scott.
Jamie Yuccas reporting for us tonight. Jamie, thank you. And right now we have the mayor of Orlando, Buddy Dyer, with us. Mr. Mayor, what is the latest from the hospitals as you understand it? When would those families begin to learn about their loved ones?
Well, the hospital, well, let's step back. We were able to get HIPAA regulations waived for this to be able to notify some of the families.
Patient privacy regulations.
So the hospital has notified the families of patients that they are caring for. Okay, so if you weren't one of the families that has somebody that is in surgery or being cared for, you probably have an idea that your family member is unfortunately in the other group. We hope to identify all of the victims this evening. It's been a very painstaking process because 40 of the victims were in the nightclub. It was a scene that the FBI had to close for evidentiary purposes. They are working on by victim. We have a website where as we identify victims and notify their next of kin, we can go ahead and list them because it's got to be just a horrible thing for a family to kind of know but not really know what has happened. When I got the call this morning at 3 o'clock, first thing I did was call my 26-year-old son and say, "Where are you?" He was home in bed, thankfully. And
are the bodies still inside the club, all 50?
No, they are not. Some are, but they've started the process of relocating them over to the medical director for identification.
And you expect all of the bodies to be removed to the coroner's office by what time?
I would hope by late this evening, no later than in the morning.
What more do we know about the gunman?
Whatever the FBI has detailed, I have not been focused, quite honestly, on his identity and his specifics. I'm more focused on taking care of the families and the friends of the victims and doing what we can to rally the people in Orlando. We're not going to be defined by that individual. We're going to be defined by how we respond and lift up those in need.
Your police department put an end to this fairly quickly.
I'm so proud of the men and women of OPD. There were, as you mentioned, over 300 individuals in that club. It could have been worse, but our first officer that engaged the gunman probably allowed a lot of people to get out the back, and then about 5 o'clock we were able to breach a wall and rescue between 15 and 20 of the hostages. That's when we engaged the gunman and took him down.
There were reports earlier this morning that as many as 20 people had been killed, and then you came out and told the nation that the number was 50. When the police officers told you that,
it was horrible to find that out. We had had an estimate from a police officer that had originally engaged with the shooter. We couldn't go back in because we thought that there were explosive devices, so until the building had been cleared, bomb robot went in. We couldn't go back in and specifically identify it, and then it was shocking how many were actually in there.
Were there any explosive devices?
There were not, although there had been text messages about the shooter outfitting hostages with explosive vests. That turned out not to be true. And when he was killed, there was a battery pack that was right next to him and a bag, and we thought there was probably an explosive device with a detonator. Turned out the battery pack came from somewhere else. I don't know if it was a smoke alarm or what, but fortunately that turned out not to be the case.
So the gunman had no explosives?
To the best of my knowledge at this point, he did not have explosives.
Mr. Mayor, the whole nation has you in its heart, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you. Pray for our citizens.
We will. Thank you, sir. The president also asked America to pray today. He asked the citizens of the United States to pray for the victims, to pray for the families, and to help the families bear what the president described as the unbearable. Juliana Goldman has more on this.
At the White House and at government buildings today, flags were lowered to half staff, on order from President Obama, who declared the Orlando massacre an act of terror and an act of hate.
This is a sobering reminder that attacks on any American, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation, is an attack on all of us. And no act of hate or terror will ever change who we are or the values that make us Americans.
The worst mass shooting in U.S. history immediately reignited heated political debates over terrorism and gun control. Presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump reiterated his call to ban Muslims from entering the U.S., even though Omar Mateen was born in New York. And in a statement, Trump criticized the president, saying he disgracefully refused to even say the words radical Islam. For that reason alone, he should step down. If Hillary Clinton, after this attack, still cannot say the two words radical Islam, she should get out of this race for the presidency. Neither Obama nor Clinton were ready to link the attack to Islamic extremism. In her statement, Clinton said, "We need to redouble our efforts to defend our country from threats at home and abroad." And she told the LGBT community that we will keep fighting for your right to live freely, openly, and without fear. Republican Senator Jeff Flake said, in this case, there doesn't need to be an either-or with terrorism or guns.
I think that debate can and should go on, as well as the debate on how to best protect us against those who are inspired or funded or directed by international terrorists.
The administration appears to be putting politics on hold. Scott, the White House announced President Obama will not be campaigning with Hillary Clinton this coming week, and Vice President Joe Biden canceled an appearance at a Miami fundraiser for tonight.
Juliana Goldman reporting from Washington for us tonight. Juliana, thanks. So many people today in Orlando wanted to donate blood. The blood banks actually had to turn many away. There is some controversy about that tonight, and David Begnaud has more.
One of the reasons you're having trouble with the signal of Scott here in Orlando is because it started to rain. But I want to show you the people who are still here while it's raining are folks who have been standing in line for more than 11 hours. When the call went out this morning, it said urgent. We need blood, O negative, O positive, and AB plasma. And these people with umbrellas moving toward the front door have been here since the call went out this morning. They showed up thinking, what can we do? This is the only thing we can do. There was one moment today that was a bit controversial. There were gay men who showed up. Since this directly affected the gay community, they wanted to give back. They were told they could not and turned away. That's because the FDA long had a regulation which said gay men cannot donate blood, but the FDA has since changed that regulation. The company where we are tonight is still updating their policies and procedures, and so they were not ready to receive the donations from gay men, and that is why those gay men were turned away. But that has not stopped the stream of people that are here outside the building. We're told nearly 3,000 to 3,500 people have stood here and elsewhere across the state of Florida, and the urge continues tonight, at least the request for more blood. Scott, anyone over the next 48 hours can give blood, and we're told that within 24 hours of testing that blood, it can be given to one of the victims.
David Begnaud reporting for us. David, thank you, and we'll be back from Orlando in just a moment. This morning, a man was arrested in California. He was heavily armed, and he told officers that he was on his way to the Gay Pride Parade in West Hollywood. Correspondent Maria Villarreal has more.
Santa Monica police are working alongside the FBI, looking into the motive of James Howell of Indiana, a man arrested close to the LA Pride Parade route early Sunday morning. In his car, they found an arsenal. Lieutenant Saul Rodriguez.
Officers were immediately noticed that there was a rifle in the seat of the car, which led to a further investigation, at which point we recovered additional firearms, high-capacity magazines. Officers did find some chemicals that could have been used for an improvised explosive device. The suspect did make an initial statement to the effect that he was going to go to the Pride Festival. Beyond that, he did not make any additional statements saying that he was going to do anything further than that.
As we march in the streets today under gray skies, and as we take a moment of silence to grieve together before the parade begins, our hearts will be heavy, but our resolve will be strong.
Today, the start of the parade took a somber tone as officers lined the streets of West Hollywood.
At this time, we just want the parade to go on. There's no known threats.
Laurel Pettis is among those who are fearful after seeing what happened in Orlando.
I mean, obviously what he did was to try to instill fear into our community, and so I think a lot of it was coming out here to support, to say that we're still strong. We're here to support people that lost their lives last night and their families as well, and to show them that we're not going to stop what we're doing, and this is who we are.
The parade is wrapped up here in West Hollywood with no major incidents. Now, while law enforcement does not believe James Howell had any connection to the Orlando shooting, Scott, they're not ruling anything out until they solidify his motive.
Maria Villarreal in Los Angeles for us tonight. We'll be back from Orlando in just a moment. The standoff here in Orlando ended today a little after 5:30 in the morning Eastern Time, when the Orlando Police SWAT team used stun grenades and an armored vehicle to smash into the building and engage the gunman in a gunfight. We have just received some audio of that. Let's have a listen. Part of the sound of the gunfire that ended this terrible siege here in Orlando, Florida. The Tony Award ceremony will go on this evening. It will be aired on CBS, that is in New York tonight, but the producers have decided to dedicate the award ceremony to the victims and the families here in Orlando. In a statement, the producers said, "Our hearts are heavy for the unimaginable tragedy that happened last night in Orlando. Our thoughts are with the families and friends of those affected." We'll bring you up to date on all the latest information when we come back. Here in Orlando, they are beginning to remove the 50 bodies from the Pulse nightclub just over there behind me, over my left shoulder. The mayor has told us that they hope to have all of the bodies removed to the coroner's office by this evening. At least 50 people have died. More than 50 others were wounded, many of them critically. The club was about to close when the shooting started. The gunman is identified as Omar Mateen, born in the United States to Afghan parents. He was a security guard by training and bought 2 guns in recent days, including the AR-15 semi-automatic rifle that was responsible for the carnage in the club. During the attack, he actually called 911 and pledged his allegiance to the terrorist group ISIS, though it is not clear if he had any direct contact with that group. Mateen was killed in the shootout with police around 5 a.m. That concludes our special edition of the CBS Weekend News. Tomorrow, CBS News coverage will continue as CBS This Morning originates from Orlando, and we will see you again here tomorrow on the CBS Evening News.